Two men from completely different worlds met in Ramadi, Iraq. The city had functioned as the self-declared capital for Al-Qaeda in Iraq, but in 2006, they were formally kicked out when they lost the Battle of Ramadi to coalition forces. The threat was far from over though. Conventional warfare requires conventional tactics and clearly defined territorial lines. A military force starts to consider unconventional options when all else fails, and they lose territorial integrity. Al-Qaeda and its subsidiary, the Islamic State in Iraq, lost territorial integrity in 2007. Flushed out of Baghdad, forcibly expelled from Ramadi, and losing the entire Anbar province, they embraced fully the unconventional tactics that formed their modus operandi: insurgency. The largest contiguous area of land held by Al-Qaeda was Mosul to the north, and from there, they directed insurgent attacks against the cities they had lost. Chiefly fueling this insurgency was the steady trickle of terrorists through notoriously porous Middle Eastern borders and fighters from isolated pockets in Iraq. IEDs, targeted assassinations, and suicide attacks were carried out to disrupt coalition consolidation operations and intimidate the local population. For coalition bases and outposts, they reserved vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices, VBIEDs. In this city, so deeply permeated by violence, two men of the Marine Corps met: Lance Corporal Jordan Haerter and Corporal Jonathan Yale. Both were American, both were riflemen, serving in the same military arm, but came from two different worlds. Jonathan T. Yale was a financially struggling 21-year-old youth from rural Buckfield, Virginia, who graduated high school in 2006. His mother said he was the kid who made people laugh in class. She called him the class clown, not unaffectionately. Jonathan was that guy who was always with the bros, but still didn't mind sitting home with his mama to watch a chick flick with a bottle of Kleenex between them. His mother said he was the best boy you could ask for. When he was little, Yale would vanish with his granddad in the bushes. His grandfather called him Wild Man because no matter how many scratches he acquired in the woods, he always wanted to go again. Jonathan joined the Marines to support his family. He was in a declining marriage and was seeking a divorce. He was a rifleman of the 2nd Battalion, 8th Marine Regiment. His unit had begun its rotation back to the States, and he couldn't wait to be home. Unlike Jonathan, Jordan Haerter was raised comfortably in the small village of Sag Harbor on Long Island, New York. He was a kind and thoughtful young man and quite the entrepreneur. He had a quick wit with a dry sense of humor and a full life of good ahead of him. In Jordan's bedroom at home, just one look would have been enough to show you what his interests were. There were Yankees posters, Marine posters, an American flag, and Cessna cockpit posters hanging on the walls. He had a girlfriend whom he would regularly drive 1,000 miles from Dijon to see. Jordan had learned to fly at 16, and in a frame in his bedroom was a Shirt Tails signed shirt to commemorate the accomplishment of his first solo flight. Jordan was a rifleman with the 1st Battalion, 9th Marine Regiment, and had deployed to Iraq just 1 month earlier. He was only 19. His deployment served to teach the Iraqi police peacekeeping methods in their cities. Jordan joined the Marines because he was both patriotic and adventurous. Jordan's battalion would be replacing Jonathan's, but at the moment, the two battalions were on ground in a transitional phase. On April 22, 2008, at Joint Security Station Nasser in Ramadi, Iraq, the two Marines started their guard shifts together as complete strangers. Jonathan, the seasoned and highly experienced veteran, had a lot to show Jordan, who had arrived just 2 days ago. They were paired up for this exact reason. Their shift began just around 7:30 a.m. and they stood guard at the entry control point. All was well for just a few minutes. The joint security station in Ramadi was situated on a busy thoroughfare. Because of the frequent occurrence of the VBIED attacks, the entrance was heavily reinforced with sandbags, concrete fencing, and concertina wire to create a serpentine funnel through which vehicles could only pass through one at a time. So when a solitary large blue dump truck suddenly turned and began to roll down the road with obstacles strategically placed in such a way as to reduce vehicular approach speed, everyone realized that something was very wrong. The dump truck swerved crazily to the right and then to the left, avoiding the barricades and flying unimpeded towards its target, the guard post at the gates. The general atmosphere went from one of confusion to horror when it was determined that the driver had no intention of stopping. The truck's movements were crazy, but the clear-eyed vision of the barricades put it as clear as day that the driver was in full control of things. It was a VBIED suicide attack. The first security guard further up the road was an Iraqi policeman. Being the only man there, he either lost courage or realized that his position was not easily defended. So he bolted, leaving truck and driver to advance towards the gates uncontested. Jonathan Yale and Jordan Haerter were alerted to the situation by the sound of roaring engines and tires screeching due to the high-speed contact with the asphalt. By that nearly telepathic communication that often exists between the devil dogs of the Marine Corps, they made their decision. Neither of them was stepping out of position. Neither of them was giving even 1 foot of ground to this terrorist. They both knew what was at stake. They were well aware that about 50 Marines and 100 Iraqi soldiers were in the barracks behind them, completely oblivious but doomed to certain death or disfigurement if this madman got into the security station. They could have gotten out of the way to save their own skin, but they didn't. They were riflemen of the United States Marine Corps, and true to their motto, they were always faithful, even in the face of their assured demise. So Jonathan and Jordan raised their rifles and began to fire every single round of ammunition that they had at the truck. The whole affair lasted exactly 6 seconds, but it took 2 seconds for the two brave men to lift their weapons and start firing. By then, the truck was halfway through. The suicide bomber kept speeding down the 70-yard alleyway, and the Marines kept shooting. Some Iraqi soldiers and police who had joined them in shooting lost courage at this point. They realized that they had about 3 seconds left to save their hides. They too bolted. But not the two devil dogs. They kept putting round after round into that cursed vehicle. Shards of glass and metal flew off the disintegrating truck, and inside, the driver was getting torn apart by bullets. He kept going, urged on by his fanaticism, or perhaps by his rigid legs pressed flat against the gas pedal in his death throes. The truck finally stopped a few feet away from the men and detonated. Experts said it had about 2,000 pounds of explosive material. The blast could be heard for miles. Jonathan Yale was killed instantly. The explosion produced a massive fireball that incinerated the immediate vicinity and collapsed several buildings, including a mosque. The bomb left a crater 5 feet deep and 20 feet wide. Windows of houses 150 meters away from the impact area were shattered. There was dust, debris, and chaos everywhere. Surviving Marines reached for their weapons and ran out and about, screaming, "We've got hit." Jonathan Haerter succumbed to his mortal wounds and died soon after. The next day, Commanding Officer Lieutenant General John Kelly raced to Ramadi. He interviewed about half a dozen eyewitnesses, all Iraqis, as no American had witnessed the attack. Their accounts were roughly identical. They all saw the blue truck speed up as it maneuvered through the serpentine alleyway. All of them admitted to only having understood what was happening when the Marines started shooting. Some of them said they fired too, then ran to safety when the truck got too close. One of the Iraqis in particular said this to General Kelly with tears in his eyes. "Sir, in the name of God, no sane man would have stood there and done what they did." No sane man. They saved us all. The general ordered a thorough investigation into the incident, and during a sweep of the decimated gate area, a damaged security camera was found buried under rubble. The recording was retrieved intact, and it showed those 6 seconds of utter bravery and provided visual evidence that neither Marine ever stepped back, hesitated, or even shifted his weight before the explosion. Like men of the Marine Corps, ever and always faithful, with their feet spread shoulder-width apart, they leaned into the danger, firing as fast as they could walk their weapons. We might not have known much had it not been for Lieutenant General Kelly, who immediately went to work on getting the Navy Cross Awards for both Marines. Kelly delivered this speech to the Semper Fidelis Society of St. Louis on 13th November 2010. These young men failed to save themselves, but they succeeded in saving countless others. Had that truck breached the perimeter, the explosion would almost certainly have become one of the deadliest attacks against American forces during the Iraq War. Instead, the blast detonated at the gate, where 2 young Marines chose to make their stand. Jonathan Yale was 21 years old. Jordan Haerter was just 19. 2 ordinary young men entrusted with an extraordinary responsibility. They stood their ground when every instinct screamed to run. They gave their lives so that hundreds of their brothers could live. Some heroes are remembered because they won great battles. Jonathan and Jordan are remembered because in 6 seconds they proved that great courage lies in making the decision that someone else's life is worth more than your own.